The woman had dirt on her cheek, a split lip, and a shotgun pointed straight at his chest. Behind her, a little boy clutched the edge of her skirt like it was the last rope holding him above water. His eyes were wide and hollow, his shirt hanging off his bones. And tucked against her side, barely a whisper of a child, stood a girl who hadn't blinked since he'd dismounted. "I ain't here to steal," the cowboy said, hands still raised, reins trailing loose in the dust. The wind stirred the dying cornstalks behind the cabin, brittle and gold like old paper. No birds, no sounds but the creaking of his saddle and the sharp hiss of her breath through cracked teeth. She didn't lower the gun. Not yet. But let's go back to where it all started. Eli Mercer had never cared much for schools, but he knew what it meant when a town lost its teacher. They'd buried Miss Ashton the week before. Typhoid, fast and cruel. Folks had hung her bell up on the chapel porch like it was some kind of tribute, but the truth was the kids would stop coming. And when the kids stopped coming, families stopped staying. Then land sold cheap. Then the vultures came. Eli wasn't a sentimental man, but he wasn't blind either. He'd watched 3 wagons roll out of Dry Creek in 1 week. And still he stayed. Tilled. Hired help when he could. Ate beans cold out the can when he couldn't. The ranch wasn't just land to him. It was a scar he'd earned. With calluses. With blood. With a promise to a brother long buried. So when Reverend Calloway came riding up with his sun hat and his sweat-slick forehead, Eli figured it was about drought or donations. He didn't expect the Reverend to talk about a woman living in the broken cabin 3 miles north of the creek. She was the substitute teacher back east. Came out with her little kin months ago. Said she'd teach here if she had to. Town never paid her a dime. Eli crossed his arms, boots scraping dust off the porch. "She's not on anyone's ledger," Calloway went on. "Living out there with 3 young uns. No man, no help. And I heard the baby crying last night like the Lord himself was mourning." Eli didn't say anything, just looked out at the hills where the wind never rested and the sky bent close like it wanted to listen in. "You said you needed someone who knows children," Calloway said finally. "You said your boys are growing up like wild colts. That you're tired." Eli blinked slowly, then looked away. "I said I needed a cook." The Reverend didn't argue. He just touched the brim of his hat and turned his horse around. Dust rose behind him like regret. Took Eli a whole day to make the decision, and even then, he rode out slow. Just to see. That's all. The path to the cabin was barely a trail. More dust than dirt, lined with thorn brush and the bones of old fence posts. The roof sagged like it was tired of standing. A chicken ran from under the porch. Something brown and fast scurried into the woodpile. He saw her then, not inside, but outside, barefoot and kneeling in the dry garden rows, yanking weeds like they were insults. Her skirt was torn, her braid frayed, and when she looked up, she looked straight through him. She didn't ask what he wanted. She stood, wiped her hands on her apron, and walked toward the door. The boy appeared a second later, maybe 6 or 7. Quiet, thin, watching with an animal's caution. Then the girl, no older than 4, with knobby knees and a runny nose. Her dress was too big, her eyes too old. Finally, the baby started crying from somewhere inside the house. Eli hadn't said a word yet. He dismounted. "I heard you were a teacher," he finally said. The woman's lip was cracked, her cheek bruised. She didn't flinch. "Was. You taught in Dry Creek?" "Tried. They didn't want lessons. Just manners. And none of those either." Her voice had the sharpness of someone who used to cry but didn't anymore. Eli respected that kind of edge. It meant she'd seen some things. Might still be standing after seeing more. "You married?" he asked. Her eyes flickered. "No." He nodded like he'd expected that. "They yours?" "They're my sisters." She swallowed. "She died 2 months ago. Fever." Eli looked at the boy again. He looked down at his bare feet. The wind picked up. The porch creaked behind them. Eli scratched his jaw. "I've got a bunkhouse out east. With stove. Blankets. Feed. You cook. I can make a rabbit stretch 3 days. You teach. If they're quiet enough to hear me." My last cook ran off with a peddler. I don't run, she said flatly. He looked her in the eye for a long second. Then he said it. You teach kids. Why not raise mine? For the first time, she blinked. Her hand tensed slightly on the doorframe. You offering charity? No, he said. I'm offering work. A roof. A fire that won't go out. She turned her head just a little, listening to the baby wail again inside the house. Her throat moved. Her lip trembled once, then hardened. I don't even know your name. Eli Mercer. She didn't offer hers, but she opened the door and called softly, Hannah, Will, Ruth, come out here. The three children stepped onto the porch like ghosts, blinking at the sun. The little one, Ruth, he guessed, clung to her skirt. I got a wagon, Eli said. Big enough for all of you. She didn't ask where. She didn't ask how long. She just nodded once and said, Give me a few minutes to wrap the baby. And as he walked back toward the trail, he heard the boy whisper, Where are we going? And her voice, steady and soft, Somewhere the floor don't freeze at night. The wagon wheels groaned under the weight of silence. Eli kept his eyes on the trail ahead, reins loose in his calloused hands, boots braced against the footboard. He didn't speak, not because he was cold, but because he'd seen how words sometimes made things worse before they ever made them better. Behind him, Hannah sat with the baby wrapped tight in a faded quilt. Will rode on the edge of the buckboard, legs dangling, eyes scanning the hills like he was watching for something. Maybe wolves, maybe memories. Ruth had curled up beside a sack of flour, thumb in her mouth, her small boots knocking against the wood with every jolt. Eli had taken in stray calves, a wounded hound, even a Comanche boy once when he was younger and braver. But this felt different. These weren't strays. They were what was left. When they reached the fork near the dry creek bed, Hannah finally spoke. You live out this far by choice? I live where the grass grows long and men don't come knocking. She looked away. Fair. The ranch unfolded ahead like something God made and forgot. Long fences, fields going gold. A barn so worn it looked like it'd sigh if it had lungs. A windmill creaked in rhythm, and in the distance, a few horses watched like curious children. The main house stood modest but square, wood faded to silver. The porch was swept. The steps are solid. It wasn't much, but it didn't look like it wanted to hurt anybody. As Eli stopped the wagon, one of the ranch hands, a Mexican boy named Mateo, not more than 19, came out wiping his hands on a rag. This her? He asked quietly, glancing at the children. Eli nodded. Mateo looked unsure. She gonna cook or teach? Both. Mateo glanced toward Hannah, then back at Eli. You sure, boss? Some folks might say. I don't care what they say. He helped her down without asking, holding out a hand. She hesitated, then took it, her palm dry and small in his. She handed down the baby next. He was fever-warm, eyes glassy. Eli frowned. She yours? Mateo asked. No, Hannah said, but I'm all they've got. Mateo muttered something soft in Spanish and backed off. He knew when to leave a story alone. The bunkhouse sat behind the main house, near the pump. Eli pushed open the door. It was clean, sparse. A potbelly stove, a pine table, for bunks with folded quilts. He'd cleared it out himself the day before, not knowing why until now. There's oats in the barrel, beans, lard. You'll need to shoot game, unless you want the town butcher's prices. I can handle a rifle. He believed her. Water's cold but clean. Don't let the kids drink from the trough. She nodded, setting the baby on a cot. The other children explored in silence, eyes wide. Ruth stared at the quilt like it was silk. You said you needed someone for your boys, Hannah said. Eli leaned against the doorframe. They're not babies, just wild. How many? 2, 9 and 11. Their ma passed 4 years back. I've been trying but, he paused. They don't listen to me like they used to. She pulled the quilt tighter around the baby. Boys listen to calm before they listen to shouting. He gave a half smile. Then you might be the first calm thing they've ever heard. She looked around the bunkhouse like she was counting the corners. measuring the quiet. Her fingers touched the windowsill. She didn't ask about money, didn't ask about Sundays. Just said, "We'll stay out of your way." "I don't want you out of the way," Eli said. "I want you part of it." That quieted her more than anything else had. She didn't know what to say to that kind of kindness. Word got out before the first week passed. By Sunday, old Mrs. Dobbs at the Mercantile was telling everyone Eli had taken in a widow teacher and her starving kin, and that she cooked with wild onions and prayed over beans. By Tuesday, young Jeremiah Trout claimed he saw her carrying a rifle on her hip and 2 children on her back. Eli ignored most of it. He hadn't taken her in to make a statement, but he couldn't ignore Thomas Bearden. Bearden owned half the valley's water rights and all of its opinions. He rode up in a clean vest and a dusty smile one afternoon while Eli was branding fence posts near the edge of his land. "Saw the smoke from your bunkhouse," Bearden said. "Thought maybe it was Mateo cooking again. But then I heard he's been sleeping in the hayloft." Eli kept hammering. "He moved. The place is spoken for." Bearden leaned on his saddle horn. "They say you brought in a schoolmarm with no papers, and 3 kids that don't look much like her." Eli didn't respond. Bearden spat. "Town folks are talking. You know how they get when someone doesn't explain themselves. Then maybe they should stop asking questions that ain't theirs to ask." Bearden narrowed his eyes. "You helping her? Or keeping her?" Eli dropped the hammer, wiped sweat off his brow. "If you came here to talk like that, you can turn around." Bearden smiled tightly. "Just watching out for the valley. Don't want folks getting the wrong ideas." "They already got him," Eli said, turning back to the fence. He didn't watch Bearden ride off. Didn't have to. He could feel the man's eyes long after the hooves faded. That night, as Eli walked past the bunkhouse, he heard soft voices inside. Hannah was teaching them something, numbers maybe. The baby was quiet for once. Will was asking questions and Hannah answered without snapping, without fear. Just warmth. He lingered outside, listening. He hadn't realized how long it had been since that sound lived on this land. A woman's voice, steady and strong, stitching something back together with nothing more than patience. But as he turned to head back to the house, he saw a flicker of movement on the far ridge. Too far to be a ranch hand. Too still to be a deer. Just a silhouette watching. And then it was gone. The next morning, Eli rode out alone. He didn't tell Hannah. Didn't want to worry her. But the figure on the ridge had stuck in his mind like a thorn. It hadn't moved like an animal. It had watched like a man. And men didn't just linger in silence unless they were hunting something. He followed the trail past the fence line, up the dry slope where sagebrush gave way to jagged rock. The air was still, too still, like the prairie was holding its breath. Crows circled somewhere behind him. He dismounted halfway up and let his horse graze. The prints were faint, but they were there, 2 sets of boots, one larger, one smaller. One dragging slightly, not fresh but not old either. They led toward the hollow behind the ridge where the land dipped into shadow. He found what he was looking for beneath a copse of mesquite trees. 2 men had made camp. Empty cans stacked near the fire pit. A blanket laid out like they just stood up and walked off. And something else scratched into the dirt with a stick. "Mercer takes in strays." Eli crouched beside the words, jaw tight. This wasn't just idle talk. Someone had come to watch, to judge. By the time he rode back, clouds were forming low on the horizon. Hannah was hanging laundry between 2 poles, her hands red from scrubbing. She glanced at him but said nothing. Will was stacking firewood. Ruth sat on a stool peeling potatoes with a knife too big for her hand. The baby slept in a basket lined with rabbit fur. Eli slid down from his saddle. "You seen anyone near the bunkhouse?" he asked Hannah. She nodded toward the barn. "Mateo saw a man out by the east fence early this morning. Said he whistled and rode off when spotted." Eli's eyes darkened. "Was he carrying anything?" "Didn't say." He looked toward the hills again. The wind was picking up. "Keep the rifle close," he said quietly. "Don't wait to use it." She studied him for a second, then nodded once. No fear, just readiness. That night, thunder rolled in soft and slow. the kind that stayed in your bones long after the sky cleared. Hannah stood by the bunkhouse window with Ruth curled beside her, both watching the flicker of lightning across the plains. Will lay across a pallet near the stove, already snoring. The baby nursed in silence. Eli knocked once before stepping in. Just checking the stove, he said, though it was already glowing warm. It's holding fine, Hannah said, but he didn't leave. She looked at him. You think they're coming tonight? I think someone's been sent to scare you off, he said. Someone who wants you gone without having to ask twice. I've been scared before, she said softly. Didn't leave then either. He shifted, thumb grazing the brim of his hat. They'll come around, or they'll burn themselves out trying. Hannah looked down at the baby. Why did you take us in, really? Eli stared at the fire for a long time. My boys. They stopped needing me. Or maybe I stopped knowing how to be needed. She said nothing, but her face softened. A quiet understanding passed between them, something heavier than words. Then came the knock. Not the wind, not the creak of wood. 3 sharp knocks at the main house door. Eli froze. So did Hannah. He stepped back outside, rifle already in hand, boots silent on the dirt. The wind had picked up, snapping the clothesline. Lightning flashed again, throwing ghostly shadows across the porch. At the door stood a boy, 17, maybe 18. Long dark hair, braids tied with leather, a battered satchel slung over his shoulder. He didn't flinch at the sight of the rifle. Are you Eli Mercer? I am. The boy nodded slowly. I was told you had a woman here, one who used to teach. Eli studied him. Who told you that? The boy didn't answer. He looked past Eli toward the bunkhouse. I came to speak to her. Eli stepped aside. You'll speak to me first. The boy hesitated, then said, She taught my sister, back in Missouri, before the fever. Eli didn't lower the gun, but his grip loosened. Your name? Samuel Graywater. Eli searched the boy's face. He was thin, sunburnt, but steady. There was no fear in his eyes, just something quieter. Grief, maybe. She said if we ever found her, she'd help. Eli finally nodded once. Wait here. He walked back to the bunkhouse, opened the door gently. Hannah, he said, there's someone here to see you. She looked up, confused at first. Then the name clicked. Her face drained of color. She passed the baby to Ruth, crossed the room, and stepped out into the night. The moment she saw the boy, she gasped. Sammy? The boy nodded. I thought you all. Ma and Emma didn't make it, he said. I ran. Took weeks. But I followed the river like you said. And I found you. Hannah broke. Just a small sound, like a breath catching in the throat. And then she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. Eli watched from the shadows, lowering his rifle. Thunder rolled again. But this time it sounded more like an ending than a warning. Still, something in Eli's gut tightened. Because trouble didn't always knock 3 times. Sometimes, it waited in the dark. Quiet. Watching. And he could feel it getting closer. By morning, the storm had passed. But the air held that strange weight. The kind that made horses skittish and birds stay low. Everything felt too still. Samuel sat near the barn with Ruth in his lap, braiding blades of grass into circles while she giggled. The boy hadn't smiled once when he arrived, but now he smiled like he remembered how. Inside the main house, Eli stood at the window watching them, one hand resting on the rifle propped against the sill. Mateo came in from the porch, hat in his hands. Boss, you need to hear this. Eli turned. There's riders, Mateo said. I saw 'em on the rise. 3, maybe 4. They ain't from around here. Eli's jaw flexed. Did they stop? They circled once, looked down this way, then moved on. But not fast. Eli nodded, then looked toward the bunkhouse where Hannah was baking bread. The smell drifted through the morning like peace, but it didn't fool him. Trouble was pacing. That evening, Eli saddled his horse again. He didn't say where he was going, but Hannah stopped him at the edge of the barn. You think it's Bearden? Eli met her eyes. He wants the land, wants me off it. Always has. But why now? Eli took a moment to answer. Because you gave this place a heartbeat again. He don't like that. Hannah's jaw tightened. So what happens if they come? We don't open the door. He hesitated, then added, and we don't run. She nodded slowly, then lifted her chin. You raised your boys. Let me raise mine. He paused. Yours. She didn't flinch. I taught them to read. I keep them fed. I hold them when they cry at night. That's what mothers do. Eli studied her for a long, quiet beat. Then he tipped his hat and rode out. The riders came back on the third day. For men, hard eyes, dusty coats. One wore a deputy's star that had long since lost its shine. They didn't dismount, just sat like vultures at the edge of the ranch road. Eli walked out alone. The one with the badge, Deputy Klein, spoke first. Heard you're harboring someone. Eli squinted at him. Plenty of someone's here. You'll need to be more specific. A woman, 3 kids, and now a boy who don't belong anywhere. Eli didn't blink. That boy has a name. Samuel Graywater. His family died in Missouri. He's here now. That's all you need to know. Another rider snorted. That's all you think we need to know. Klein leaned forward on his saddle. You know how this goes, Mercer. You take in too many strays, the whole town starts a skin who owns what, whose water gets used, who teaches whose kids. Eli crossed his arms. You came all the way out here to lecture me about water and school bells? We came because someone sent word you were hiding things that don't belong. Eli took a slow breath. You see any chains here? You see bars. The deputy shifted. Don't play games. Eli's voice dropped. Then don't come onto my land pretending your badge means justice. The silence cracked like a match being struck. One of the riders, nervous, younger, fingered the butt of his revolver. This ain't done, Mercer. Eli stepped closer, slow but firm. It is for now. The deputy pulled the reins. We'll be back. Eli's voice was like gravel. Then bring more men, because this land has fences. And I stand on all of them. The riders turned and trotted off, dust curling behind them like smoke from a gun barrel. That night, Eli didn't sleep. He sat by the porch with his rifle across his knees, watching the moon move across the sky. The bunkhouse windows were dark, but inside, he knew the children were curled together like puppies. Hannah near the stove, Samuel sleeping light as always, one eye always half open. Near midnight, the bunkhouse door creaked open. Hannah stepped out barefoot, a blanket around her shoulders. Can't sleep? Eli asked. She sat beside him. Too quiet. They didn't speak for a while. Then she said, he was my student, you know? Samuel. Back in Jefferson County. Smart. Fast. Never said much. But he always helped the others. Eli nodded. He's strong. He don't know it yet, but he is. She glanced over. When Bearden comes again, what are you going to do? Eli didn't look at her. What I have to. She swallowed. They won't stop with threats. No, they won't. Silence again. The kind that said things neither wanted to admit. Then she said it, like a whisper across a prairie. I'm not scared of them. I'm scared of what you'll have to become to stop them. Eli looked at her then, eyes tired. You keep the kids warm. You teach them. You cook and you hold them when they cry. That's more than anyone's done for them. He touched the brim of his hat, voice low. I'll do the rest. She didn't argue, just nodded once. Then they sat, 2 shadows side by side on a wooden porch under a moon that refused to blink. And far off in the hills, where the road bent out of sight, a torch flickered, once, then vanished. Trouble was not coming. It was already here. The sky was gray at dawn, thick with a stillness that made even the chickens quiet. Hannah stood at the bunkhouse door, eyes scanning the hills. Her apron was dusted with flour, but her hands didn't move. Behind her, Samuel fed the baby with a careful hand while Will and Ruth worked quietly, setting the table like it mattered. No one had slept well. Not after the torchlight had danced on the ridge. Eli hadn't come in all night. He stood now in the barn's shadow, his rifle resting against the post, saddlebags ready. Mateo sat on the fence, watching the hills like they might give him warning. They wouldn't. At breakfast, Hannah spooned porridge into bowls, but no one ate. Even Ruth, always hungry, just stirred hers around and leaned into her brother's shoulder. Eli finally spoke. "I want all of you in the cellar tonight." Hannah's spoon stopped midair. "You think they'll come?" "I think they won't send riders next time. I think they'll send fire." Samuel set down his cup. "Let me help. I can shoot." "You can watch over them," Eli said, his voice firm. "That's help enough." Samuel didn't argue, but his jaw tightened in a way Eli recognized. The boy was trying to become a man too fast. Later that afternoon, the first sign came, quiet and simple. A dog barked down in the canyon, frantic and sharp. Eli stepped onto the porch, eyes narrowing. Then the second sign. A bird, black, fast, rushing low over the fields. And then the third. Smoke. A single black thread curling up from the trees beyond the creek. Not a campfire. Not a stove. It moved too fast, too dark. He turned.
Mateo.
"Saddle the horses. Put buckets by the well." Mateo nodded and ran. Eli walked to the bunkhouse. "You've got 2 minutes," he said. "Pack only what you can carry." Hannah didn't ask questions. She was already tying Ruth's shoes. By the time the fire came into view, it had grown teeth. Dry brush caught quick, and the wind turned cruel. Flames crawled over the ridge and into the trees near the fence line. Bearden hadn't come himself. That would have been too bold. But his intentions were painted in every burning branch. Eli stood between the blaze and his ranch, shirt soaked with sweat, eyes burning. Mateo and Samuel passed buckets in rhythm, water sloshing over their boots. "Will help too," dragging pails, coughing but moving like a mule. Hannah kept the cellar door open. Ruth pressed against her hip, the baby tight in her shawl. She didn't cry. She just waited. Then hoofbeats. Eli turned. Not riders from Bearden's land. Not lawmen. Comanche. 5 of them, painted and silent, horses trotting through the haze. They didn't raise weapons. Just came down the ridge and stopped, watching the flames. Samuel froze, water bucket in his hands. The leader, a tall man with gray streaks in his hair, pointed toward the blaze, then at the house. Eli stepped forward, breathing heavy. "You here to help?" The man didn't answer, but he dismounted, walked toward the bucket line, and picked one up. Then the others followed. No words, just action. For 2 hours they fought side by side. Rancher, boy, tribesman, farmhand. Eli's hands blistered. Smoke tore at his throat. Mateo collapsed twice. But they didn't stop. The fire reached the fence line, clawed at the barn, then, finally, turned on itself, burned out, smoldered, gone. The Comanche didn't linger. When the last flame died, the gray-haired leader approached Samuel and nodded once. Samuel touched his hand to his chest and bowed slightly. The man pointed to Hannah, then to the children, then made a circle over the land. He was saying, "She protects. You protect. This is sacred." Then he left. No words spoken. None needed. That night, Eli sat by the well, shirt torn, boots soaked. Hannah brought him coffee. Her hair was loose for once, falling over her shoulder like black rope. "You called them," she said. Eli nodded. "Years ago, I helped bury one of their own. Not out of duty, out of respect. I guess they remembered. They saved us." He nodded again. She sat beside him, close this time. "You don't have to fight alone," she said. "I didn't come here to hide." He turned his head. "You came here to raise them. That's more than enough." "No," she said. "I came to keep something alive, and I think I found it." Eli looked at her hand resting near his. He didn't take it. Not yet. But his hand stopped shaking. And for the first time in weeks, he didn't reach for the rifle. Inside the bunkhouse, Ruth slept with a piece of braided grass beside her cheek. Will snored like a freight wagon. Samuel sat at the table, sketching the fire with charcoal, his hands stained black. and the baby slept with a full belly and no cough. Outside, the stars blinked open. The land still smelled like smoke. But the ranch, by some miracle, still stood. So did they?